As the venerable Jimmy Lennon Jr. would say, it is showtime. You know what it is. If you don't know, now you know. All that good stuff. What's going on, everybody? My name is Davidson Baker, the host of this podcast that you've stumbled upon today, as well as, a contributor and writer at a variety of places that, we could care less about in the moment, because there is something to care a lot about on our plate today, something to care deeply about, especially in the MMA space, the the combat sports, fight fan world, whatever you want to call it, or whether you're just a fan of sports, regardless. We got something to look forward to. Right back where we left off. I think my internet kind of glitched for a second right there. But regardless, once again, my name is Davidson Baker. I am the host of this podcast. This is the 68th edition of the 31st MMA fight-related rendition of this podcast. And I'm pleased to be joined today by kind of a new acquaintance of mine, somebody that I've been looking at tweets for some time now, and someone who has, at least according to him, been looking at some of mine. He is a professional kind of glitch MMA bettor, as well as a handicapper for the good people over at MMA Odds Breakers. His name is AJ Schullo at AJ MMA Betting. Did I nail that last name, or am I going to have to practice it a couple times?
You nailed it perfectly. Not many people get it the first time. It's one of those, it's a lot easier to pronounce than it actually looks, but you nailed it the first time. So congrats.
Yeah, the way that you sent it to me, the word shoe and then the word low afterwards is a good way to kind of put that in people's brains whenever they go forward to step up to the plate with a name that they might feel like they can't pronounce. No Michael J-Chuck or anything like that. But regardless, we move on. We have a lot to get to, and let me just say this as well. On the past renditions of my MMA and fight podcasts that I've done, as I said at the top, this is now episode 31 of that variety. We have done a whole lot of, bouncing around as far as the itinerary is concerned. I like to talk about a lot of recent fight bookings that come up. Obviously, when notes and news are flying around, that is something that we touch on before we get to the task at hand, which this particular week would be UFC 249. But there isn't a whole lot. The news really surrounding everything in the MMA world, let alone the sports world, especially going into this weekend, is the card itself, given the the corresponding circumstances that are happening right now. AJ, I'll start by asking you a question before we really get down to the nitty-gritty of breaking down this card. Have you noticed anything different about this fight week in particular? Like, obviously, there's all type of social distancing measures that are being taken. Obviously, this isn't going to be a typical fight week by any means. But if you have noticed anything that would make it atypical at all, what would it be?
Definitely the testing. And it's felt like a long time ago, but that last UFC event we had, UFC Brasilia, was back in March. And, they were monitoring the whole situation, but they didn't have the testing like they do now. So the testing for sure has been the most compelling element that stuck out to me. The UFC staff is going about it in a safe way. I know not everybody is all, for having this event, but it's nice to see that UFC has the right precautions in place. They got the right medical staff, and they're going about it in a very safe way. So that is the most compelling element in this fight week that stuck out. But other than that, I mean, it's actually felt kind of normal. I mean, they're doing the testing, but like honestly, I'm going on Twitter. I'm seeing people get excited, and it's kind of that same feel for me. How about you?
You get that eerie feeling when you watch Embedded. Most people that sit and look at their calendar and see that it's Monday and have to dread the fact that there are like 3 or 4 more days sandwiched in between, getting to view the content they want to see. As UFC fans are concerned, Embedded is a big platform for them to kind of like look along and kind of follow along fight week, especially to kind of feel like you're there. Man, and seeing, media take Corona tests and going all the way back with the swab, just in its absolute beauty and glory. That alone, let alone, like I said, the eeriness, everything in the world right now is kind of, I wouldn't say turning into what is going to become the norm, but I mean, whatever normal is when it comes back, it's not going to be what it was before. And that this fight week is is kind of a good microcosm of that in a way, just because obviously things are different. You got no face-offs. I'm sure weigh-ins tomorrow, if they're even happening in any type of public presentation setting, that those are going to be completely different. I just wonder really too, what was obviously political powers that be. Do you have any like sense or guess? There's no right or wrong answer here as to how this smoothly transitioned from the California event that we all thought was going to happen and obviously didn't happen because of the bigger powers that be to Florida. Like what do you think makes the state of Florida the ideal location for this event to go on? Like I said, we don't really know the correct answer per se, so there is no right or wrong answer to this question.
Yeah, for me personally, like yourself, I like to stay informed with the news. And one of the main things that stuck out to me was the fact that WWE had WrestleMania at a venue in Florida not too long ago. And, like Dana White, Vince McMahon is a businessman that wants to, make things happen. He's an executor. And the way they went about it and where they went about it, I think they took a lead there that, had an event. From everything that I follow, it went smooth sailing. I didn't, actually watch the event live, but they went about it in a safe way, and it delivered. It wasn't the same feel, like you said, with the fans, but it's an event that took place and happened, and all things were good. The other thing that sticks out to me, in addition to news, kind of separate from sports, but I've been noticing that Florida is one of the states that's kind of relaxing their restrictions. They've got some beaches. Right. And I'm obviously not a Florida native, but they seem to be one of the states that has more. They're kind of easing back into things and going about it in a safe way. So that is my best guess as to why they're doing it in Florida and say not somewhere else.
Yeah, you don't really strike me like a quote Florida man. You seem a lot more polished, a lot more well spoken, a lot less apt to be found in a front page of some Central Florida newspaper doing God knows what. That doesn't seem like the type of guy that you are, and that is a compliment.
I'm a Midwest guy at heart, but I have been to Florida a few times. Get along with the people well. Seems like I fit in, but wouldn't be a native. It's not somewhere I wouldn't see myself living in the future.
And for those that are listening that may not, be aware, of where our guest whereabouts are, Chicago, right? You born and raised. You always been kind of from Chicago, a Chicagoan?
Yeah, Chicago area. Been here my whole life, and like it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And staying here for this foreseeable future. And nice city, nice environment, and sticking here for the time being.
Cool. Well, now, like I said earlier, not a whole lot of news to break into. No real, other than Amanda Nunes and Felicia Spencer, which was supposed to be happening in 48 hours time from now, if the world was sans COVID-19. That's really the only big fight booking as of recent. So those that have listened to my MMA renditions before obviously know we're just going to get right into the fun here, man. And we're going to start obviously at the top of the bill, like normal people would, in a fight that can have mixed emotions surrounding it as far as a fan's perspective is concerned. Obviously, we all want to see the Holy Grail. We all want to see what it pains me to even say it like at this point. And it pains me to even think about all the different coinciding circumstances. Every single one of the 5 times they made Tony and Khabib, how just, of course, a pandemic that could have been stopped by a country all the way across the other side of the world is going to be what stops us from seeing those two locked inside the octagon together. Regardless, I would say the replacement for Khabib, if he's not the best for a fan's viewership's perspective, if he's not the best replacement just for our entertainment, I don't know who is. Lightweight is stacked. But those are the opening thoughts that most people are going to get when talking about this matchup is, this is a great fight, but everybody's got that elephant in their head, man. They all want to see Khabib and Tony, or maybe potentially Khabib and Gaethje should Gaethje get his hand raised here. What are kind of your opening thoughts whenever this fight was made, and really whenever you kind of had it hit you that, well, this fight's really going to happen?
Yeah, like you pointed out with the Khabib Tony booking, it's been booked so many times to no avail, unfortunately. This is what we got. I'm not going to, cling to something that's, hasn't happened yet. If it happens down the road, then that's great. But, they try to book this so many times because they're passionate about making it happen. Like you said, it is the fight to make it lightweight. These are the, Khabib and Tony for a long time have been, the top two lightweights on paper. The argument could be made. You've got other fighters there like Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker. The division honestly has an abundance of talent, but like those two head and shoulders stick out above. But like you said, Gaethje is arguably the best replacement considering the circumstances. I think he is the best replacement here with Dustin Poirier being booked up with Dan Hooker. That fight was supposed to materialize later on here, but again, due to the postponement, I think they're going to book those guys up, but perhaps at a later date. And then obviously with Conor McGregor being another, elite lightweight draw, obviously the biggest draw in the sport, being in Ireland and unable to travel, Justin Gaethje is the optimal opponent to make here. And it isn't Tony Khabib, but look, lightweight has 4 fighters in the top 15 pound for pound rankings for a reason. This division is so deep, and you've got even fighters, you got like just 1 through 15. It's just an abundance of talent. So like, honestly, very good booking, the best booking you can make given the circumstances. And I'm really excited to go down. It's going to be a barn burner to say the least, and a very exciting fight.
I do truly believe those words that you said, whether it is for, effect to make your point or how you really feel. I'm going to assume it is how you really feel because, once again, come off as a smart guy, and smart guys tend to agree more often than not. And that's why I'm going to go ahead and land that plane there and say that I do agree. This is pretty much, for our money, the best fight you could possibly make without a Khabib Nurmagomedov in the picture. I don't think it's crazy to float out the notion that I, as a purist, now a casual is going to want to see Conor fight a stick figure, a mannequin, the floaty things in front of car dealerships. They don't care. But call me crazy, wouldn't you much rather watch these two fight than either Tony versus Conor or Justin versus Conor? I'm not trying to single out Conor in this way, but like, this fight to me just has so many more layers than any of those other hypothetical matchups. What say you?
Yeah, if it was on the table, I would say that it's kind of interchangeable in my opinion. Like, I understand the case there. Gaethje's obviously certainly on more momentum. He's on the win streak. Conor lost to Khabib 2 fights ago. No shame in that loss considering Khabib's pedigree, but he still took some time off, due to his reasons, and then came back and beat Donald Cerrone. But then you look at, to your point, Justin Gaethje defeated Donald Cerrone, and in addition to him, he defeated Edson Barboza and James Vick. So in terms of, like purely rankings, purely momentum, that I do agree that Gaethje, if Poirier and McGregor were on the table, he would be the optimal fit still. It might not do in terms of big sales, like you said, with Conor, because Conor's just such a big draw. No matter who he fights, it's going to just bring in extremely high revenue. But I agree with you. I do think it's the fight to make. And, again, the momentum, Poirier is coming off a loss too. So I agree with you there. And
now the question that I want to pose to you again, if we're going to keep playing ping pong question answer back and forth about this fight, and I hate to bring Khabib back up because I want to talk about the breakdown of this particular matchup in and of itself, but does it dampen the overall allure of this card, which is obviously stacked, which is obviously, boasting a lot of really recognizable and high profile names in this sport for a good reason? But does the fact that sticks in your head, as I said earlier, kind of the elephant in everyone's mind, does it dampen this card that Khabib is ultimately not fighting Tony for the undisputed 155-pound title? Does it change anything for you, or am I crazy?
As a fight fan, I mean, I love the fact that this card is the way it is. Again, I'm not going to cling to like what could have been or what should have been, but this is an exciting main event. This is a card from top to bottom that is just tremendous. Even the early prelims are very exciting bookings, in my opinion. I think the only card that comes to mind that is more stacked from top to bottom was UFC 200, and for crying out loud, you had TJ Dillashaw and Kelvin Gastelum fighting on the prelims. You had Gegard Mousasi fight Thiago Santos on the early prelims. Like, that card was probably like the most stacked card in UFC history, but I think this one is right behind it. And like, you alluded to, co-main event, another title fight. Yes, Amanda Nunes, to your point earlier, isn't fighting on this card, but like, that does not take away from the fact that this card is still awesome and solidified, and it's going to be just outstanding to kick things right back off.
Do you say that having like thought about it for a while? Like, do you make that claim having like really thought about it inside your head? Like, is this behind UFC 200 the second most stacked card ever? Like, if you had to go balls to the wall and research it and come away with your hypothesis, do you think that you would come away with the answer that this is to most the second most quote unquote stacked card in UFC history?
I think so. And I think the anticipation factor makes it even more hyped card than it otherwise would be, obviously with the hiatus. There's been other cards too. I mean, it's not like it just blows everything else out of the water for second place. I remember UFC 205 was very stacked when Conor moved up to lightweight to face Eddie Alvarez. There's two other title fights on this card. Yoel Romero was fighting on that card versus Chris Weidman. That was another awesome card. But like this, you add all the elements of it, the hiatus, the circumstances, like on paper, I still do think that it is the second most stacked card in the UFC history. I mean, it's going to be so hard to top UFC 200. Even 10 years from now, we still might be pointing at that card and being like, that card is the most stacked in the UFC history. But this card is still awesome, to say the least.
Now to kind of dwell on the actual ins and outs of the main event, because boy, it is a phenomenal fight. And is one that I've been clamoring for and waiting for, hoping for, whatever adjective, adverb, whatever you want to stick in that sentence. I have been looking forward to when two of arguably the most wild of wild men in, for my money, the best division in all of MMA, just talking about strictly UFC's lightweight division. I think UFC's lightweight division is a hair better than the UFC's welterweight division, but welterweight as a whole, like around the world, like you throw Bellator's welterweight division in there and all that, I don't think it's even close. I think 170 is the best division in the world. But 155 in the UFC, in my opinion, is the biggest Shark Tank, and you have two of the most wild guys amongst that sample size squaring off for the I word, at least according to some MMA fans, an interim title. We could have one of the few, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the few, if not the first two-time interim champ. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Was there one other person that donned interim gold more than once?
To my knowledge, you're correct. Yeah, Tony Ferguson would be the only guy, because you're alluding to his fight with Kevin Lee where he won
right.
2016. But yes, to my knowledge, because it's, as you know, it's a more recent implementation, so we don't have to go all the way back in time to determine that.
No, definitely. And, that one being just one of a dozen that now hangs in the rafters for Tony Ferguson. I know a couple days ago was his 8-year anniversary of the last time he lost to Michael Johnson. Man, I mean, Michael Johnson beating Tony Ferguson in a fight at this point, all this way down the road, just sounds something that isn't even realistic at this point. It's crazy to think that that was the last guy to beat him. And with such a win streak and all of this momentum, it would be easy to think that one inside of Tony's corner would have put a stop to Tony potentially taking this fight. But Tony Ferguson is Tony Ferguson. As my good friend Blaine Henry tweeted, it takes Tony Ferguson 30 minutes to watch 60 minutes, my man. Like, this guy is on another planet when it comes to everything going on up here. And I mean in the best way possible, because that's what helps him be so good and be so unique as a fighter, and definitely within his training. I'm going to stop babbling and I'm going to ask you the question. If you're Eddie Bravo, if you're anyone that has any type of close proximity to Tony Ferguson and he looks at you and says, should I take this fight? Your answer would have been what?
I would have honestly put it back on him because, I can't put myself in Tony Ferguson's shoes because I just don't see that as realistic. It's more realistic to be in his team shoes. But, Tony's a competitor at heart. I understand why he took the fight, even though he's not getting the fight with Khabib. That's just the nature of who he is. He's Tony Ferguson. Like you said, he's basically like the Chuck Norris of MMA. I mean, he'll do anything you do, like anything you thought was possible. He'll just, take it like 10 steps further, like Chael Sonnen on Twitter has a bunch of good Tony Ferguson tweets that are basically accurate as the type of person he is. But he's a wild man. I mean, he goes out there and he wants to beat all these guys. He, compared the lightweight division to like a round robin tournament. He's got to beat the best of the best. He had to, he took a risky fight when he fought Donald Cerrone. Cerrone was certainly on a lot of momentum prior to fighting him. And Tony's a guy where he's got to be confident in his ability to overcome adversity. He's been rocked in fights like against Lando Venata. Anthony Pettis cups him on. You mentioned Michael Johnson. He was dropped in that fight as well. But he just recovers so quickly. He's just such a durable and fun guy to watch. So it doesn't surprise me that Tony, did it, whether he should or not. I would kind of just defer it back to him if I was his team.
How about these couple? Tony Ferguson practices his ball handling with a bowling ball. Tony Ferguson can divide by 0. Tony Ferguson can speak Braille. That's my favorite one, I think.
He can do all those things. Like, that would not surprise me.
Tony Ferguson doesn't shower. He prefers blood baths. I mean, I feel like that's more apropos to what he likes in real life, too. You ever seen a Tony Ferguson fight? They're all bloodbaths. But another guy knows how to get into a war or two. And something tells me, contrary to conventional wisdom, say a year and a half ago, when a guy training out of a gym in Colorado decided to step into the UFC from World Series of Fighting, that was his exact reputation. Wild man, brawler, back up as much as you can. Doesn't really matter. He's going to continue to pressure you. We have seen kind of a revamp as far as Justin Gaethje's technical acumen is concerned. He has fought a lot smarter in his last couple of fights. Particularly the Barbosa fight was really when I was taken back and really seriously said that this guy could be world champion just on a way of how he's adapted and adjusted. If I were to ask you, so-and-so is going to take the fight and or pressure and or walk forward to so-and-so, which blocks would you put on which side? Who do you think is going to try to make this fight ugly? Because both guys have been known to do it in the past. And I really don't think I have any good guess as to which side I'm leaning on as to who's going to take that first step forward.
Yeah, like you alluded to, Justin has definitely changed up his fighting style. He's a lot better with his risk management. In recent fights, he's a lot less willing to take damage. He's shown better defense. It's honestly incredible. You alluded to his World Series of Fighting days. It's honestly incredible that he was fighting for as long as he did in that fighting style. His defense, his head movement wasn't ideal. He would take a lot of shots, but his chin is legendary, as John Anik had previously pointed out. I mean, Gaethje is just so good at taking damage before, and then those losses to Poirier and Alvarez, which aren't bad losses by any means, those guys are incredible fighters, really allowed Gaethje to come back and go back to the drawing board and determine the way he wanted to approach fights going forward. He's obviously still got his very devastating leg kicks. And instead of becoming more of like a volume guy, Tony Ferguson fits that style, the pressure style that you said with the walking forward. He still can land in volume, but he's, been a lot more selective with his shots. He showed really good counter-striking ability in his fight against Donald Cerrone. He's become a lot better on the shots that he wants to take. But as you said before, with the way Tony Ferguson is, he might bring that style out in Gaethje again that we've seen in his first 3 UFC fights. Even against Michael Johnson, he won that fight very impressively. He still had overcome adversity. Johnson was able to hurt him there. So you're asking me which guy breaks first in 2 guys that are just very, very hard to break. It's going to be tough. I think that, early on, Gaethje, those exchanges will favor Gaethje while he's relatively fresh. I know that he's taking the fight on short notice, but I did listen to his interview with Brett Okamoto that He helped train Neil Magny and Austin Hubbard for the respective bouts at UFC 248. So even though that wasn't him training for his own bouts, he was still in the gym getting guys acclimated and things like that. So, he's definitely, not fresh off the couch, had more time to prepare. But that said, you got to favor the cardio of Ferguson. Ferguson's the guy who landed almost 200 significant strikes at Mexico City altitude, which for those of you that aren't familiar, that's higher than Denver altitude. It is just, you got to have crazy cardio to push that high of a pace for 5 rounds. And it was against Rafael Dos Anjos too, another guy who has fantastic cardio. So certainly as the fight progresses on a round-to-round basis, it's going to be in favor of Tony Ferguson, I think, just due to the cardio. And we've seen Tony, what I alluded to with the damage he took in those fights. He could take damage, come back, and come at you and throw double, triple, quadruple the amount of strikes you threw at him. So that's the way the matchup breaks down to me is who breaks who first, but it kind of comes down to win. I think in the scenario where a fighter finishes the other early in the fight, it would be Justin Gaethje winning by finish, and as the fight kind of drags on a round-to-round basis, it would be Tony Ferguson. I understand people being confident in Ferguson because he's never been knocked out. He's shown to be durable. However, I do think that Gaethje will be a threat in the early exchanges just due to his big power, due to his superior footwork. Again, like you said before, the composure there. So very interesting fight. I think both guys, despite, that they're borderline unbreakable, it's going to kind of come down to when that breaking point happens. I think later on, Tony will be the one to break Gaethje, but early on in that scenario where the finish materializes, it'll be Gaethje that breaks Tony.
Hard to imagine, at least for me, that this fight goes the 25-minute distance, but weirdly enough, I've been seeing that kind of be horrible grammar there. What am I thinking of? What's the word I'm thinking of here? I've kind of seen that as the norm, or at least heard that as the norm. I've been hearing a lot of people kind of pin on the wall their belief that they believe this fight is going to 25 minutes. I really wonder whether that has more to do with the fact that both of these guys are so durable, or that, I think that it's not very far-fetched to believe that these two could potentially face a little bit of a struggle getting in an actual fight during this current time period. Other people, coming in on short notice, coming in, off half a training camp, fine, it happens all the time. What the world is going through right now does not happen all the time. I would be shocked if full capacity was available to both guys in terms of what their normal training regimens are, what type of routines they like to get in. I'm kind of eating my words in the middle of my sentence because I just realized Tony Ferguson cut weight already, and he's going to do it again. Like I said, the guy takes 30 minutes to watch 60 minutes. We don't know what type of life form he is. I just have a hard time seeing this go the full 25-minute distance. As we said off the top, you do a lot of your bidding through helping people figure out what it is they need to take the tickets to the window for in the MMA sphere. So I'm not going to ask you, and nor am I at any point through this podcast going to ask you for a round or a method or a winner. But if there is a key or an X factor for either guy for you, especially from a betting perspective of if I'm looking at this fight and I want to pick a winner, what's sticking out to me in my head and is not going to let me sleep when thinking about this matchup that eventually leads me towards picking a winner? Is there anything stylistically between these two that you kind of notice?
Yeah. In our previous talking point, we talked about, the breaking thing. And I do think that will be the difference here. I think for those that are on the side of Gaethje, they think that he will make the most of those exchanges early while he's relatively fresh. Certainly, Gaethje could have a lot of success in the early exchanges. And those on Tony either think that, Gaethje won't be that big of a threat early on, or if he is, while he's relatively fresh, Tony will be able to, again, rely on his durability and toughness to outlast that and, tire Gaethje out, because we've seen Gaethje tired in the past, again, and not that his cardio is bad or anything like that, but we have seen, Gaethje take a lot of damage, and we have seen him tire out, alluding to the Poirier, Alvarez, and even the Johnson fight as well, just due to that high output style. So that's basically the way the matchup breaks down. For those on Tony, think that, Gaethje will not win by finish. And as we talked about before, on a round-to-round basis, Tony should be the fresher fighter, should be pressuring more. Tony's also got a 6.5-inch reach advantage as well. He doesn't fight tall as well as, say, like a John Jones, but, again, an advantage nonetheless. And that's basically the way it breaks down. Gaethje will certainly be a threat early on. And if Tony makes it through those early exchanges, he certainly has a chance to win as the fight goes on. Yeah, and to your point out about the fight doesn't go to decision real quick, it makes a lot of sense why the odds are the way they are. Just Stack doesn't go to decision because of the way they fight. But to your point, they are very durable. So that would be the logic for why you think the fight can go the distance, just because both guys are just so tough and durable. Could take a shot for sure, and some.
And as of this exact moment right now, if you go to betonline.ag, Tony Ferguson hovering around -170, Justin Gaethje plus 145. We move on to the second of what is a double dip in UFC title showcases. And man, I don't know if I would go as far as saying this is my favorite fight on the card. It's definitely damn close. If Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje were not involved, it probably would be. I'll just go ahead and just say, in my opinion, what most people are thinking, or what a lot of people in my circle were thinking. Are we happier that this fight materialized for the 135-pound championship of the world than the one with Jose Aldo? Sucks, because Jose Aldo was supposed to be at the centerpiece of this event this weekend. Obviously, Sao Paulo was supposed to be the host. Really, really, really hard to believe that they did not book Cejudo and Aldo in that supposed main event without obviously thinking of the King of Rio himself in mind. Now, obviously, one thing happens after another, and we're in Jacksonville, Florida with no spectators, and an interim lightweight title fight is in front of it. And Dominick Cruz steps in on the rebound. Your thoughts on this fight? Do you like it, from a purist, from a fan, whatever kind of hat you want to wear, do you like that this fight is taking place on Saturday night more so than if we would be getting Cejudo and Jose Aldo?
I don't know if I like it more. I think they're kind of similar fights for Cejudo. I mean, he's undoubtedly, in my opinion, on the most impressive winning streak in the UFC right now. I mean, just look at his last 3 fights. Demetrius Johnson after a dominant title reign. TJ Dillashaw after, his incredible performances prior to that. And then Marlon Moraes, a devastating striker that is very, very impressive in the UFC thus far. So Cejudo, wanting that money fight against, big, compelling figure in this sport makes a ton of sense. And whether it was Jose Aldo or Dominick Cruz, I think the case can be made that Cejudo certainly earned it. He's stepped up. He naturally, it could be easy to forget, but he's a guy that used to fight at flyweight, and then now he's moved up to bantamweight. So he's willing to take those chances and be like a smart strategic risk taker. So Cejudo certainly earned either fight. Yeah, like you said with the Aldo, it couldn't materialize just due to the circumstances. But, I understand, bantamweight, we talked about lightweight being a shark tank before, but bantamweight, I was looking at the top 15 rankings. I mean, the division is stacked. I mean, there's plenty of guys that aren't even ranked that I think can make a chance of cracking the top 15. Mir Abdulashvili.
At bantamweight?
Yeah.
Oh, dude. I said yesterday to a close friend of mine that we're talking weight classes, 170 and 155, as I alluded to earlier, is, I think, squarely in most people's minds as the top 2 division. If 135 isn't damn close, nipping on their heels as far as the best division and overall most talented division in the sport, I don't know what is. I think 135 is full of killers, and I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, and glad you see it the same way, because I think that's why there's a little bit of controversy on this booking. Dominick Cruz has been out for so long. Obviously, he's got an incredible resume, but I think that's why people think that this title shot is unwarranted, because you have guys in the mix like Marlon Moraes, despite coming off a loss recently to Cejudo. You got Piotr Jan, you got Corey Sandhagen, Aljamain Sterling. You've got a lot of very, very strong contenders in this weight class. And so I think that naturally is going to get a little bit of controversy, especially with Cruz coming off the layoff that he is. But that said, I just like to analyze the matchup as it is. And it is a very intriguing matchup. I mean, this is a matchup where a prime Dominick Cruz could certainly win. But as it pertains to the booking itself, I have no problems with it, to be honest. I mean, Moraes was supposed to fight Piotr Jan. That's a booking that's supposed to take later place this summer. I think you could possibly do a matchup with Aljamain Sterling and Corey Sandhagen. And, I would like to see, a bit more promotion out of guys like Sandhagen and promotion, perhaps get him on a main card of a pay-per-view, perhaps have him headline a fight night. I pointed out the headliner on Moraes Jan. I think that's a good showing for both guys. So I would like to see a little bit more promotion for those key figures at bantamweight before getting that shot. And but for the time being, I think I have no problems with it whatsoever.
Yeah, neither do I, and for good reason. There are so many things to unpeel about this matchup and so many places to look. This is probably for the first time in quite some time. Maybe, Demetrius Johnson is probably a name that you could throw in the hat as well when talking about guys that aren't going to match tat for tat the wrestling of Henry Cejudo. I don't know if you've heard, bro. This is crazy, like top secret. Henry Cejudo has a gold medal. I know, insane, crazy. I don't know how I heard that. I don't know how I found that out. Maybe he should tell somebody. But at the end of the day, Dominick Cruz is known for his unorthodox weaving and bobbing and moving footwork, his unorthodox style of moving in and out and really confusing, freezing his opponent, whatever words, alliteration you want to put on there. What's constantly overlooked, in my opinion, about Dominick Cruz in his game as a fighter, that dude can stop takedowns very, very well. That guy does not get taken down. And MMA wrestling and regular freestyle wrestling, obviously two completely different things. Knowing that Henry Cejudo is going to get that nudge as far as the wrestling is concerned, if you had to guess, is a takedown heavy approach in the cards for Henry Cejudo, or do we see him kind of take, maybe the Wilson Hayes fight approach, or maybe even the Marlon Moraes fight approach, an approach that I think would be key, chopping down the legs. I think leg kicks are going to be really important for Cejudo in this fight if he wants to kind of wear Dominick down. What say you? If you're in Cejudo's corner and you're thinking of ways to kind of attack this game plan, are you going wrestle heavy, or are you going to try to take your chances on the feet?
I don't know that I would take my chances wrestle heavy. Assuming we're getting a version of Dominick Cruz near what we've been used to. Again, I know that that's got a caveat, obviously, due to the red flags. In addition to this being a layoff, the reason why it's a layoff is because of unfortunately, all the injuries he's dealt with, both upper body and lower body. In addition to that, what we talked about before, this is a short notice fight for him technically because it was supposed to be Jose Aldo. But the thing with Cejudo, yeah, he's got he's the superior wrestler. He's got the superior pedigree, the secret of the gold medal. But like you said before with Cruz is a difficult fighter to take down and control. He's out-wrestled excellent athletes, excellent wrestlers, such as Demetrius Johnson and TJ Dillashaw. Yes, that was a while ago, but got to go off what the eyes tell us. We just don't know what version of Cruz we're getting. So certainly if Cruz has some kind of nagging injuries, which, again, I'm not really sure why he would take this fight if he was coming in just completely injured still, just not able to give it a go or give it his best shot. So I would say, to your point, similar to like the Marlon Moraes approach, kind of like what TJ Dillashaw did. I know he didn't get the nod there, but it was very competitive. Pressure Cruz, because I think that Cruz does. I think he's not I think he prefers his opponents to be the aggressor, so he could, again, use that footwork movement, those attack from angles, like you said. Whereas in the Cody Garbrandt fight, that was his most recent fight, he was the aggressor there, and Cody was able to counter him a lot. I don't think that Cejudo is as threatening of a counter striker as Cody is, but I think that's the approach he's going to take. Walk Cruz down. I notice both guys could, they're both susceptible to leg kicks, so perhaps Cejudo attacks the legs, slows him down, pressures Cruz like he did with Moraes, and kind of outpoint him over the course of 5 rounds. Again, it's kind of a trickier fight to break down because, again, the question marks on Cruz. We don't know what guy we're getting in there, but that's the way I would approach it. Cejudo's also not really shown to be a guy that lands takedowns in volume in the past. I think the most takedowns he landed was in his UFC debut, and it was about 5 or 6. It was against Chris Carrioso. But since then, he hasn't really shown to land like several takedowns. So of those options, I would say he takes the more Marlon Moraes approach.
Blast from the past. You don't think he was kind of takedown heavy or volume takedown heavy against Demetrius? Well, now that I think about it, I want to look that up to make sure that I know exactly what the numbers were. Henry Cejudo against Dominick Cruz, or against Demetrius Johnson, attempted over the full 25-minute span 11 takedowns and only got 3. That's one of those fights, man. I don't know. I always thought Henry won it. A lot of people disagreed with me and told me Demetrius won it. When I watched it a second time, I gave the nod to Henry. Maybe efficiency was not really part of the reason why. 3 out of 11 takedowns. Dominick will be able to kind of stuff them, though, as I kind of said. And to go back to another point that I brought up, particularly, I think the key in this fight for Henry Cejudo is going to be busting up Cruz's legs and making him as uncomfortable on the feet as he possibly can. You know, Dominick is so – when he is doing his thing and, you know, kind of bouncing around and moving within the absolute excellent footwork that he has and creating that weird mystery puzzle for his opponent that he does, I mean, he's hard to come in on, and that's why I think it's going to be so important to not only land those strikes, but also slowly but surely chop down the legs of a much taller, much longer guy in Cruz. If we're going to flip the script here, we've already given our keys to victory for Henry Cejudo. History can truly be made in an absolutely incredible way. I know for a fact, as I said earlier, wasn't sure if I was true thinking off the dome about whether or not Tony Ferguson was the only two-time interim champion. I've got to be damn near correct, if not spot on, if I say this guy, Dominick Cruz, would be the only man to win two separate titles, both off of 3-year layoffs. I would have to imagine that that's got to be true. The keys to that reality unfolding in front of our eyes on Saturday night and Dominick Cruz becoming I believe now 3-time UFC Bantamweight champion would be what in your eyes?
It'll be remarkable. I mean, it's not like it's impossible for Cruz. I mean, I understand like the confidence in Cejudo with the momentum that he's been on and the questions on Cruz, but it would honestly be so special if he were to come back and do it again. You know, we've seen in the past, you know, against George St. Pierre, for instance, in 2017, took that massive layoff, came back, fought up a weight class and fought Michael Bisping and very impressively won there. And even Nate Diaz coming back after his layoff, after he fought Conor the second time, came back and defeated Anthony Pettis. So we've seen very talented fighters in the past come back after layoffs, overcome adversity, and come back and still win. And like you said with Cruz, you know, he came back. It wasn't as big of a layoff, but, you know, he came back after a long layoff and beat TJ Dillashaw. I mean, how impressive is that? I mean, split decision or not, that should have gone his way. You know, he came back and fought excellently with a world-class fighter. So certainly I wouldn't put it past Cruz. I mean, he's also wanted to say in his post-fight interview after TJ, he said, Russ isn't real. And, you know, I think, you know, his mindset is something to behold. And he really believes that he could do it. Obviously, the question can arise, you know, where's his head at? Like if he loses to Cejudo, is this like going to be it for him? I say that because Uriah Faber, for instance, got that very impressive win against Ricky Simon, and he had aspirations to move up the ladder, but then he lost to Piotr Jan, and he wasn't, from what I could tell, really sure as to where he was going to go in the bantamweight division. So there's certainly all those questions there, but I mean, just with the scenario of him coming back and getting it, man, that would be impressive. I mean, it would just be so special if he were to come back and do that.
Is Dominick Cruz undoubtedly, at this point, with a win on Saturday night, the greatest bantamweight of all time?
This is tough because it would seem that way, kind of just due to like recency bias alone after getting the win over Henry. But I think that it's kind of like interchangeable, you know, because I think you can make strong cases that either he, Cody, TJ, or Henry are the best bantamweights of all time. Like I could see the cases either way. And, you know, I think the reasons are fairly obvious, but, you know, like the case could certainly be made. You know, you could already say right now that Cruz is perhaps the best, but certainly if he beats Cejudo, a stronger, more compelling case could be made if he does it. So if you're asking me, like, if I were to pick one of the four, I would say Cruz. Again, also just factoring in that adversity that he's had to overcome. But yeah, I mean, I think the case, my lean would be yes, it would be him.
And as you alluded to earlier, with 135 being as good and stacked and deep, talented, young, lively as it has ever been. Oh, and not only to mention, they open the door around early next year to one Mr. Dillashaw to come back in and see where he fits into things. It is a fun time at 135 pounds and a fun fight to crown and or restrap a champion that has a gold medal, in case anybody didn't know. We are moving on past the title stakes and more into stakes that really, from the scratch of the surface, just concern one's health when these two big boys get in there and start throwing what they can throw. There's a lot of ways to dissect Ngannou and Rozenstruik. And there's one thing that I can't get out of my head, and I want to know truthfully if this has crossed your mind either. Think about the ingredients here. Super powerful, scary guy, Francis Ngannou. Super powerful, scary guy, Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Both have proven to have their own different successful pathways in the UFC, whether it come by way of Francis easily decapitating Alistair Overeem or Jairzinho just really needing to land one shot against Alistair Overeem. These two guys are so different is the point I'm trying to make, let alone the similarities in wins that they've had, at least on a recent track. Does this fight scream, oh no, look away, Ngannou Lewis Part 2 is coming to you like it potentially does to me? I'm not saying that's what happens, but I am saying that I think the whole reason, above and beyond the fact that Lewis said he came into that fight with an injury, those two just respected the hell out of each other's power. Do you see that potentially going on again on Saturday night, where Ngannou and Rozenstruik are so respectful of what the other can do if they land, that we see another Ngannou Lewis? Has that thought crossed your mind?
It's crossed my mind. I think it could happen. I don't know. It's hard to break it to you. I'm just being honest here, coming from a place of integrity.
Hey, I believe it. I think that it's very possible, and that's what scares me about it.
Yeah, I could see why. Like you said, they both, there's a chance that they just respect each other's power so much where they're just timid to throw. They're feeling out. The feeling out process is a lot longer than it otherwise would be. And we get something similar to that, like you alluded to, Francis, barely threw any strikes in that Lewis fight. He said after the fact that his confidence was hindered due to the Stipe loss. But I know the reason why you're bringing it up, because we haven't seen him go like a 3 round since. All of his other wins since then have been quick in the first round. He hasn't been past the 1 minute, 11-second mark, because obviously, like you said, he's got such devastating power, freak athlete, long reach advantage, proficient counter striking capabilities. And so something similar to that could happen, where they're just kind of standing just out of the way each other. And we've even seen it in other fights where fighters are just really respectful of each other's striking acumen and power, like against, hate to bring it up, but Yoel Romero and Israel Adesanya most recently. So certainly that scenario could happen. I get the fact. I get why the odds are the way they are. It's the odds suggest that it's very not likely to go to decision. It's around like minus 300 last time I checked, because they're such devastating strikers. But to your point earlier about the durability, neither guy's been actually knocked out in MMA. I mean, they've both shown good chins. I mean, I was looking at, Rozenstruik's fight. Isn't that great? I mean, I was looking at Rozenstruik's fight against Overeem, and Overeem's, still very technical, still got pop in his hands, and he was taking some clean overhand lefts from Overeem and just ate him and just kept walking forward. So there's something to be said about his chin. And then Ngannou's chin against Stipe. I mean, yeah, Stipe got a lot of work done in the wrestling, but there were some striking exchanges there where Stipe was hitting Ngannou. And, Ngannou lost there convincingly, but, he still went a full 5 rounds with Stipe Miocic, baddest man on the planet. So, do I want it to happen? Probably not, but, it can happen. So to answer your question, it's a possibility, a realistic one, I think.
That's the right answer, in my opinion. However, one that none of us want to hear. We don't even get our opportunity or our chance, whatever may have you, to see the little light show in the background that the fans can put on, like they did at the beginning of round 3 of, I believe, the 2018 International Fight Week co-main event. There was something else I wanted to touch on with this fight too. Yes, that being, like I said earlier off the rip, when it comes to this fight, both guys are known, especially to the naked eye, the casual eye, whatever you want to call it, for their power, for their knockout ability. Make no mistake about it, these two guys acquire said knockouts in very different manners and in a completely different stylistic fashion. Ngannou, much more of, a boxer, just like strictly a boxer, where Rozenstruik comes from a kickboxing background. Rozenstruik will be willing to throw a lot more kicks. I think he does a really good job diversifying his attacks with his kicks to the body, to the legs. as to where obviously Ngannou is just so damn powerful that I'm not saying he doesn't need a whole lot else. If this is mixed martial arts, you need the whole package if you want to go anywhere. But both of these guys are very good in their own unique ways. Is Jairzinho's kind of more technical style, for at least for the heavyweight division, mixed with that kind of raw power? Is that like the beginning of the ingredients of what you would want to beat, say, Francis Ngannou, or does Stipe Miocic still have that blueprint tucked and hidden away in his pocket in regards to just taking him down over and over? Like, do you see Jairzinho knowing what he's good at and what he's able to do being a matchup that is particularly difficult for Francis?
I could see it. I think the key thing with Francis here is to get him tired. I understand, like, he can be taken down, like you said, with the Stipe fight. Stipe used that as a tactic to, obviously get top control time, but it really helped get Francis tired. And, we've seen Francis face wrestlers in the meantime and still win. But the key ingredient there, or it's very evident that Francis is very dangerous early on. And he's a densely muscled guy. I mean, the guy's got like very little body fat on him, from crying out loud. And he throws his strikes with just extreme force. But that said, that causes a lot of energy to do that. So Jairzinho, obviously, he's not known for his wrestling or grappling. So like the Stipe wrestling approach in that sense is kind of off the table. It'd be kind of crazy to see one guy shoot on the other. But he can use his superior pace, his superior work rate. I understand he was down 4 rounds or 3 rounds to 1 to Alistair Overeem, but what he showed there was he could go a full 5 rounds, fight at a, adequate to decent pace and land a proficient amount of significant strikes. Francis is very dangerous. But, Jairzinho has shown the superior work rate that's backed. I use a stat provider site called UFCstats.com, which backs all that information up. So that's certainly on the table for him. Yeah, he will need to he will be at most at risk while Francis is fresh early on in the fight. And he will basically, to your point, with his acumen, stay out of trouble, be the busier striker, and kind of wear Francis out / not take too many risks by exchanging in the pocket.
Sounds about right when it comes to the provisions of what Rozenstruik could do, what Ngannou could do. It's a fight a lot of us have been looking forward to. It's a fight that one of my favorite towns to visit when I was still living in Ohio, Columbus, missed out on. Poor Nationwide Center. Regardless, we move along. And a really interesting fight at 145 pounds between a couple of guys that could use a W and a couple of guys that might be trending in completely opposite directions. We see this happen all the time. I hate the term gatekeeper just because, there really is no set. You don't, as an organization, as a matchmaker, as a governing body, whatever you are, you don't put a hat on somebody and dub them as the all knowing and forever keeper of what is ultimately contendership, because that's what gatekeepers are. They are to hold the quote unquote gate closed for when a potential guy is getting ready to come up and crack into that kind of upper echelon. That guy is there to either send them away, tell them try again later, or to open up the doors for them. I hate that word. I don't like it being used, especially in this context. But man, Jeremy Stephens has kind of been hung out to look like a freaking gatekeeper in his recent history. The Yair Rodriguez's of the world, the Zabits of the world. I think the Aldo loss for him was an absolutely crushing defeat. I think he was a win away in that fight from getting a crack at Max. And now you fast forward, Jeremy Stephens now has been winless in his last 4 outings. That is including the one that did not go down as a win or a loss in Mexico City against Yair Rodriguez. Quick off the rip, just talking solely about the man in the red corner here at plus 200, the 7th ranked featherweight in the UFC rankings, Jeremy Stephens. What's your take on Jeremy right now in his career? I know a lot of people that still think he's got a lot left. I know a lot of people that will go all the way on the other side of the spectrum and call him a bum. And, where do you land when it comes to assessing Jeremy Stephens and his abilities in this division right now at this stage in his career?
Yes, to your point about him being matched up with those losses, he's fighting young up-and-comers. Yeah, and unfortunately, he was one win away after, if he were to beat Jose Aldo, go up and fight Max Holloway. He was riding a lot of momentum there. And the reason why he was on momentum is he was coming off very impressive finish wins over Josh Emmett. I mean, that win aged very well. And then Ju Ho Choi. So Stevens, just analyzing him stylistically, he's kind of the same fighter he's been for most of his career. He's a capable wrestler. He's not, like on the level of wrestling as say like a Frankie Edgar, but he's shown to be a proficient wrestler. He even showed that his last fight against Yair Rodriguez, took the third round there. And he's got the big power, that's been a big talking point. That's obvious in his right hand, but that's kind of also his kryptonite. I mean, he wants to really land that big shot. And obviously he's got enough power to hurt anybody if you hurt a guy like Josh Emmett. But he kind of relies on it a bit much. And that's why when we see him go to decision, he's got 7 wins and 12 losses when going to decision, because he just doesn't have a great round winning volume. And will need to basically do damage or take you down. And those previous matchups that you said were just kind of tough for him. Zabit's a beast. I mean, he's just a young up and comer that's making his name in this division. Yair Rodriguez, obviously a very incredible fighter as well. Jose Aldo, legend of the sport. He's just, because it's easy to just look at a guy's losing streak and just, kind of dismiss him on a fight-to-fight basis. But really, it's I got to consider the level of opposition. I'm not ready to write Stevens off.
Very true.
He's got an incredible chin. He's still got the power. He's still got the same tools that he's always had. Unfortunately, he's just running to a losing streak. Now, that said, this is still not an easy matchup here against Kattar, which I would like to turn back to you to go back to your next talking point.
Yeah, and that talking point being, this is a bona fide fight of the night contender if there ever is one. Both of these guys, incredible with their hands, great chins, tough, gritty, really know how, and can grind out victories whenever needed to do so. I don't think either of these guys are going to go in there with a grinded out approach per se. I think that they're both going to go out there swinging. And a Jeremy Stephens coming into an octagon where he knows he needs a win is a very dangerous Jeremy Stephens. And with him winless in his last 4 outings, as we've alluded to, if he's taken care of, if Kattar, let's just say hypothetically, Kattar goes in there and starches him and gets rid of him quickly, that would then be 5 fights. And as you mentioned, strength of schedule, A grade. The guys that they've been having him sign on the dotted line to face, some of the best 145-pounders in the world. However, if Stephens gets taken care of relatively quickly in this fight, which I don't know if he will, I think he has passed to victory, but I do think Calvin Kattar has plenty himself. That would make 5 fights now without a win for Jeremy Stephens. What could potentially be the prospects going forward immediately for him if he comes out of this now 5 times inside the octagon in a row without getting his hand raised?
Yeah, it's an interesting spot. I certainly don't think he's in any danger of getting cut despite the losing skid if it happens.
Me neither.
Yeah, because he still is a ranked fighter, to your point. He still is a guy that, again, strength of schedule. Kattar's still obviously a top 15 guy, very talented. It is a tough matchup for him. I think it would kind of just depend on him. I don't want to spoil anything for later on, but we got Donald Cerrone and Anthony Pettis that would kind of be in similar situations, I think, with a loss. But it's just kind of up to him. He might not might not be as motivated, if he doesn't get the job done here. And like you said, he's got, he should be extra motivated here because I'm sure he's itching to get back in the win column. He's always going to be dangerous. But yeah, in a scenario where he loses and Kattar wins very convincingly, like early in the fight, or even just finishes him, even if it's later on, I think that's just a tough spot for him because, if it's say then versus the decision, because, he's a guy that's shown great durability throughout his career. But if he gets hurt and finished in the fight, that's kind of just a tricky spot going forward. So I kind of think it would be up to him. If from where I sit, I think he should probably remain in the division if he wants, and then fight, a guy, within the top 15, not ranked as highly as him, maybe somebody that's 10 through 15, and then go from there. Maybe he fights like a Shane Burgos type or somebody like that. But it'd be an interesting scenario should that happen.
Interestingly enough, surrounding the reality that is with the start on Saturday night, Jeremy Stephens would move in alone in third place with 33, I believe. It will be 33 come Saturday night. UFC fights, which is absolutely tremendous. Jeremy Stephens making his debut all the way back in May of 2007 at UFC 71. Now to the curtain jerker in the same weight class as our fight previous to this one. And this one has any heavyweight fight between two guys that are known to knock others out can be a very easy selling point. That is my opinion as to why this landed on the main card. Could it be because Greg Hardy made a couple All-Pro and Pro Bowl teams? Potentially. Could it be that because Greg Hardy is a controversial figure that most people want to tune in solely to see get knocked out? Potentially. Are there arguably an entire host, and when I say that, I mean all of the fights underneath it, do they all potentially deserve to be higher than this fight on this card than it is? Potentially. However, it's the world we live in, ESPN era or not, Dana White era or not. The UFC on ESPN kind of show whatever it is you may have it. This is the reality of what MMA is at this point. It's entertainment mixed with a lot of sport and a lot of violence. And Greg Hardy and Yorgan De Castro, I think, can fit that quite well. I happen to think that this is really, really good matchmaking here. I'm glad they didn't just throw Greg Hardy at a top 15 guy. However, I happen to think also that man, Yorgan De Castro, has got something working up there in the Northeast, because from the original film study I did on Yorgan De Castro pre-Contender Series, when he was I think he closed at like plus 600. You could have got him at an even better ticket on other websites and other places. All Yorgan De Castro did was go in there and notch the biggest odds-wise upset in the history of the Contender Series by a mile, and it's not even close. And then all he did was go out there in his UFC debut in enemy territory against a guy in Justin Tafa who had a lot more I'm not trying to say potential momentum for sure. Justin Tafa was coming off an absolute cracker of a run, and you see Tafa knock out Adams in February and see that it's even an even better win for De Castro. The point I'm making here is I think De Castro is peaking potentially at the right time and is a guy at heavyweight that has improved so much. That's a guy I don't want staring across from me right now in the heavyweight division. And I think that's the exact type of test Greg Hardy needs to see if he's ready to move into that top 15. Your thoughts on this fight as a whole, and what kind of stands out to you about either of these guys staring across from each other on Saturday night?
Yeah, you said it first with, perhaps the argument could be made that this being as early on the, or as late on the card rather, as it is unwarranted. But like you said with Greg Hardy, people will want to watch him fight. So I have to think that that's why this fight is as high as it is on the card. People will tune in for him, especially with all the other sports on hiatuses. People know Greg Hardy. He brings in a lot of, attention, just going back to his UFC debut, for instance, he was the co-main event in that spot when the headliner was TJ Dillashaw and Henry Cejudo. So certainly the UFC knows that people will watch Hardy, and I have to think that that's why the fight is as high as it is on the card. In addition to that, you said from a stylistic perspective, it is a heavyweight fight, so there's always that potential to finish. Obviously, both guys are threatening finishers. Hardy came in similar to De Castro, came into the UFC with a lot of quick finishes, quick knockouts. Both are very threatening strikers, and both are very athletic and fast. I mean, people think like heavyweights, they're big guys. They're slower than the smaller weight classes. These guys are really fast and agile, athletic. I noticed De Castro, you said on his Contender Series fight, it wasn't what won him the fight, but he threw a flying knee there, and it was like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. In addition to that, you said coming through as an underdog, he's got some devastating leg kicks. He's got a kickboxing background. He's a guy that he's looked great from the footage that we've seen of him, but he's still kind of an unknown guy. Like, I think what this matchup tells me, the most compelling element is
very good point.
We'll learn. Yeah, we'll learn where De Castro is. Like, I think he could potentially be like a top 15 type of heavyweight if he comes out of here with his hand raised, because Hardy is a really good test. Hardy's been in there with Alexander Volkov. Hardy's been the 3-round distance, trains an American Top Team and is still improving. So I think this matchup will tell us a lot about DeCastro. And it will tell us, like Hardy, he hasn't really shown that like willingness to really brawl, which is kind of what, DeCastro, he did a really nice counter in that fight against Justin Tafa. Tafa was kind of coming at him with a brawling style, and, DeCastro was able to come back and counter. So it'll be interesting the way they match up stylistically if Hardy will oblige to that style that DeCastro has, or if that doesn't happen, what does DeCastro do to adapt to Hardy? If Hardy fights DeCastro, say like he did to Sully, fights at range, picks his spots, uses his speed and movement and reach to kind of just stay out of danger, how will DeCastro respond? I'm excited to see how he looks here, because I think we'll learn a lot about him.
I think we'll learn a lot about both guys, and I think you could plug and chug that last sentence you just used for both guys. I'm excited to learn a lot about both guys, especially, as I alluded to you off the air coming into this podcast, I've lived, breathed sports my whole life. I've known about Greg Hardy far before I can guarantee that he even thought it was plausible and or possible that he'd be fighting in the UFC, and was still sacking the quarterback every single Sunday. And the curiosity when I saw him begin to take amateur fights, and then lack of curiosity I had until he went pro, because he was just going in there to his amateur fights and just being the alpha inside of the cage or octagon or whatever may have you, opposite an incredibly poor soul that promotion took advantage of. His early fights were just, first time he touched them, they were out, they were done. They were either out cold or on the ground. And so this is, even his first couple of fights as a pro were kind of like that as well. The Contender Series, they thought Austin Lane was going to give him more of a challenge. He didn't. I think this is fantastic matchmaking. I think this fight is perfect for both of these guys coincidingly, but DeCastro has improved so steadily. The key, though, here, and my big question that I'll pass off to you before we get down to the prelims, how much I've said it, and I think it's very easy to tell on film how much better DeCastro's gotten from CES to now. Where's the level of improvement, in your opinion, Greg Hardy, from pro debut on the Contender Series to now? How much is really there, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's actually really noticeable. In his UFC debut, he came out with that blitzing style where he wanted to go out there and win by quick knockout. And when he couldn't, he got tired there and then, got disqualified. But I noticed a lot of improvements, and I have to attribute that to he's really young in his MMA career. He's also, young in general. I believe he's 31 years young. And
also an elite level athlete, like a top of the line, best of the best level professional athlete.
That too. And it's like, it's kind of similar to, you've got somebody with a very high IQ and they're unfamiliar with the subject. Well, here, let's just pass on this information, make sure they absorb it. And well, basically they're going to master it. And that's what we have here with Hardy, training an American Top Team from an analogy perspective. He's training with very talented training partners. Just him being there and growing in his MMA career, that's only going to make him better. And that's showing in his fights. I've noticed improvements with his takedown, his cardio management. I think that loss in his debut taught him a lot. Because he's fought. He isn't really that guy anymore where he's going out there and wanting to win by quick knockout like we saw in the Sasoli fight. He's pretty content with kind of picking his shots, winning rounds, and just improving as an MMA fighter, getting more octagon time. And, obviously if a finishing opportunity presents itself, he's going to go for it, like in his fights against Juan Adams and Dmitry Smolyanov, I believe. He'll go for it for sure. But he's kind of at that stage right now where, yeah, I do think he's improving. I noticed improvements with the takedown defense, the cardio, the round winning ability. His striking output hasn't been improved. So, yeah, I definitely see the improvements with him. And again, I have to think that, again, to your point, elite level athlete, improving, still young in his MMA career, and that hard work that he's putting in is a reason why. So I definitely think that, we haven't seen Hardy plateau, even though he lost to Volkov, look how good Volkov is. Volkov's an excellent fighter. So
did he take that on short notice too?
Yeah, took it on short notice in Russia. So it's like, talk about a tough circumstance, when Volkov is as long and technical as he is. So
I don't know if there are tougher circumstances, especially for a guy who, while we talk about his improvement and while we highlight all of the, pluses, he's still raw. He's still pretty green in a lot of areas, as you should be for a guy that, made his debut not even on the debut summer of the Contender Series, second summer of the Contender Series, which to me still feels like it was yesterday. And who knows if we'll get season 4 this summer, but that is beside the point. The point about Hardy that is going to be crucial and vitally important to this fight is, as I said again, and I will say it again, Yorgan De Castro's improvement is there. Film don't lie. From CES to now, it's so there. There were colleagues of mine and really guys that I respect more than just about anybody in this business that would have taken the deed of their house and put it on the line for Yorgan De Castro to get smoked in his Contender Series debut against Alton Meeks, who's a big, strong, tough, gritty wrestler, power wrestler, power double legs. Everybody in that little circle, including myself, didn't give De Castro a single shot based on the evidence provided to us, based on the film that we had seen of it, as you mentioned earlier, which was not a whole lot. However, from then to that win and that win to Tafa, and man, he can really begin to turn some heads, or at least should, at heavyweight, should he get it done again on Saturday as a plus 165 dog. Now, a fight that certainly could fit the description of being on a main card, being that, I don't know, one of these guys in his last outing was opposite quite arguably the most important / popular man in the history of the sport. That man donning a cowboy hat and sipping a Budweiser probably the moment his fight ends on Saturday night. His fight being a rematch too. Both of these guys really desperately need a win. Both of these guys coming off losses on the same night. In January, both by finish. Obviously, Cowboys a little more emphatic. I'll go ahead and shut up now and go ahead and let you take the floor with this fight. What stands out to you, at least initially, thinking about these two running it back?
A lot has changed, obviously, since 2013 when these two first fought, and both of them were much closer to the primes of their careers. But also another element, a couple elements that stick out to me that are still advantages in favor of Pettis is his speed and athleticism. I still do think he holds the advantages there. And, he will be a threat early on to Cerrone. And that is kind of like what's making this fight just so tricky. Like both guys really need a win. You could argue which side needs to win more, but they really need it here. And while I don't think, similar to Stevens, while I don't think either guy is in danger of getting cut with a loss, I think it could be a scenario where either guy faces a loss, and unfortunately, I hope I'm wrong with this, but the contemplation of retirement may show up. Like, I hope that doesn't happen. Obviously, they're going to do what's best for them. But we might, with a loss to either guy might mean the last time we see them inside the octagon. And honestly, both guys have given so much to the sport. They're both legends. They're just always, there's not a single fight like either guy's in that is just outright boring. Both guys have still shown that they still have stuff left in the tank too. Pettis, that finish win over Wonder Boy keeps looking better and better. Even though he was losing early on, the fact that he pulled that off, a guy that's never been finished inside the octagon, doing that there in the bright lights as a welterweight, really stuck out to me. And then Cerrone, he's facing a skid, but prior to his 3-fight losing streak, had wins over Alexander Hernandez. Eli Quinta was on an impressive win streak themselves. So both guys have been certainly inconsistent lately. But again, just the thing that sticks out the most to me is some of the advantages that Pettis had in 2013 are still relevant today.
No, that's a really good point. And I think when trying to pull the hairs back between picking a side here, it's really difficult sometimes to pick these types of fights when just looking at the broader picture rather than stylistically breaking guys down. Mentally, it's pretty safe to assume, and obviously evidence backs us up given interviews and recent quotes and what have you, that both of these guys are not in a space where they are at the highest level of confidence that they've ever had. But I think you couldn't have hit the head on the nail any more than you did. Pettis still has to his advantage so many aspects and weapons that make his game what it is available to him, whereas I don't know if I can say the same thing about Cowboy. And Cowboy was on such a tremendous run when he did, as you mentioned, did beat the Alexander Hernandezes of the world, did get through the Ally Quintas of the world, did get through the Mike Perrys of the world, all in succession. And with the baby and the whole, I'm a dad now all of a sudden I want the title, it was something that people gravitated towards. Now, obviously, on the wrong side of 3 fights in a row, all ending in I barely count the Tony fight as a finish. I was there, and both of those guys could have gone another 3 rounds. But I digress. You said it. Who needs a win more? It's hard to argue, and you said you could argue either way. Is it Cowboy? I don't know how it is in Cowboy. I think both guys desperately need a win. But hey, Pettis loses. Maybe he doesn't say the R word after the fight's over. Maybe he fights out his contract or whatever is left of it and goes and follows little brother over to Bellator, maybe just in time for a potential lightweight Grand Prix. I'm sure that would be perfect timing. I'll go ahead and shut my trap and let you speculate. Who do you think needs a win more desperately between these two?
I think who needs it more is Donald Cerrone. With a loss here, that will be the biggest losing streak of his mixed martial arts career. He was facing a skid when he had lost to Jorge Masvidal, Darren Till, and the bout after that. But with another loss here, after already having 3 straight losses, certainly I think Cerrone needs it more. I think that, I know it's well documented but for those of you that don't know, he was, unsure or didn't really want to be in there in his fight against McGregor. I know that, sometimes he's, he's just kind of inconsistent, what I said before. So I think that, if he were to avenge a loss, even though it was several years ago, I think that would put Cerrone in a better place going forward. But that said, it's still kind of tough because of all the damage, like you alluded to with the Ferguson fight. It was, the stoppage was what it was, but he still took a lot of damage there. And it's just a lot of momentum swings with him. He had those aspirations to move up the ladder at lightweight. There was even people, and understandably so, picking him to beat Tony Ferguson due to that momentum he was riding. But, it just kind of it's a spot where I do believe that Donald needs it more than Pettis. Donald had his moments against Ferguson, but I would argue that Pettis has shown better moments recently. Again, the Stephen Thompson finish. And also, even though he lost to Tony Ferguson, he dropped Tony Ferguson briefly in that fight, had some success. So I would say Donald kind of needs it more from a confidence perspective because he hasn't shown as many strong moments as Pettis has recently. And again, that 4th straight loss, not in danger of getting cut or anything like that, but it would put him in a spot where he may contemplate retirement, unfortunately. So
I don't want to think about a world in the UFC or MMA without a Cowboy taking fights halfway across the world against guys that are 3-1 favorites all the time, because you can always count on one guy to fit that mold, that guy being Donald Cowboy Cerrone. And what a lot of people maybe have a potential gripe with about this fight is the weight division that it's in. The understandable aspect of it is obviously doesn't take a genius to understand. The less weight you cut, happier the fighter, healthier the fighter, the less risks the fighters are taking. I'm sure Cowboy is beyond thrilled that he's not going through another weight cut down to 155. If, hypothetically speaking, you threw all of those nuances out the window, let's say weight cutting was a glorious experience and no pain was a result of it, and there was no risk involved, and you could just walk into a room, press a button, and bam, you walk out with that weight. Is this the right weight for these guys to be fighting at?
Under those circumstances, I would say no, mostly just because both fighters have fought the majority of their careers at lightweight. However, I know that we're unfortunately not under those circumstances. Those
are impossible circumstances that are not real. So
no matter how bad the fighters, I'm sure, would like them, unfortunately, that's not the case. But I think it makes sense considering the current circumstances as they are. Both guys have made a lot of weight cuts. I'm sure not easy. I know Pettis has even fought at featherweight at one point, and then Cerrone moved up to welterweight, then moved back down to lightweight. I'm sure that wasn't easy considering the stage he was at in his career. So To your point, yes, in a perfect world, lightweight would be the case, but due to the true circumstances, I would say welterweight is more appropriate, just so these guys could, not have as rough of a weight cut and, make sure that they're more healthy than they'd otherwise be if they were to cut another 15 pounds or so.
Comment in from the name Peligroso. I believe that is translation for dangerous or danger of some sort. It says Cowboy gave such a piss poor account of himself versus Conor. He needs to redeem himself against Pettis in the rematch. Hey, plug and chug the name Anthony Pettis at the beginning of that sentence and Carlos Diego Ferreira in Conor's name, and you got the same sentence, meaning basically the same thing and creating the same situation for both guys here. And both situations actually happened on the same night in January. I think both guys really expected in January, respectively, to go out there and fight a lot better than each of them did. Last really quick question on this fight. What fascinates me thinking about it stylistically is what happens if this turns into a grappling match? Like, what happens if one thing leads to another and all of a sudden, oh my God, we're here on the ground, someone's in guard? Who gets the edge? Because both of these guys' submission games, for how many times they have dazzled us with their striking, the Showtime kick, all the head kicks, both of these guys can grapple. There ain't no question about it. And they've proved it many a times. I'm not saying either of them are, world champions in BJJ. However, both of these guys are no slouches if the fight hits the canvas. If it does, you would give the edge to which guy? It's tough. It's tough.
And it's even tougher than it otherwise would be because, like you said, we've seen them strike so much. And it's in a lot of the matchups they're in, their opponents respect their ground game so much, they don't even want to, attempt a takedown. And certainly I'm sure they're drilling a lot of takedown defense to make sure that they don't end up on bottom from one of these guys being on top. But honestly, I know Cerrone hasn't been tested a lot there in his recent fights, but, we'd have to go back to, say, like the Mike Perry fight. But that was really slick submission there. Pettis, honestly, I thought Ferreira was going to beat him. And, I thought that was a good match for Ferreira, as I thought Diaz was. But, I was pretty surprised to see Ferreira, even though Ferreira's got an incredible pedigree, he's like a third-degree BJJ black belt. Yeah. I was surprised to see Ferreira not just take him down and take his back, but submit him, pretty early in the fight. It was pretty concerning for me. And then in addition to that, obviously, again, he did what he did against Charles Oliveira. Very impressive. That's another very impressive win that aged well. And then he was able to reverse Nate Diaz one or two times on the mat. But for the most part, Diaz and Ferreira were able to control the grappling exchanges. And I would just say, kind of based off recent performance, and again, it's kind of going off a sample size of Cerrone that we haven't seen in a while. I would give the edge to Cerrone just based off the fact that he hasn't looked vulnerable there recently. Even though Diaz and Ferreira are great there, no doubt about it. Those guys are excellent grapplers. But I would just say that I would give Cerrone there because he's looked less vulnerable recently. But it's very good grapplers, no doubt about it. Both guys are.
We have finally come to the point where I think, on the contrary, if you were to ask me that question, I would have given the edge to Pettis. But we are over an hour and 23 minutes chugging along into this, and we just got a handful of fights left with less bullet points to talk about than the others. And the first bullet point here with this next one is very obvious, and I'll just say what we're all thinking. Can we just forget the MMA stuff here with this one, and can we just start these two guys on the canvas, please? Can we just say there's not going to be any striking, or can we just say this is a glorified grappling match that all of a sudden could become a glorified kickboxing match? Just start the two on the ground, and if they happen to stand up, whatever, I'll deal with it. At the end of the day, wow, a grappler's delight between Fabricio Verdum, former UFC heavyweight champion, returning from the principal's office against the Benjamin Button of Ezekiel Chokes himself, Mr. Alexei Oleinik. I'm going to pose my first question to you, and it's not one that I sent you in the outline, just because it's one that I've thought about kind of here in the past few moments. And I don't know if this is true or not, and it sounds kind of crazy. Do we think that Oleinik, based on his past few fights, has maybe been figured out potentially? Do you think guys are at least, getting a grip on, okay, here's how I need to approach fighting this guy. Here are the situations and areas that I don't want to be in. Yes, the win over Maurice Green, he looked good in that fight, and that fight went back and forth. But I don't consider Maurice Green in the same class as Walt Harris. I certainly don't consider Maurice Green in the same class as Alistair Overeem. I certainly don't consider Maurice Green in the same class as Mark Hunt. And those are the guys that Oleinik was fighting beforehand. It just seems to me from scratching the surface that Oleinik, yeah, he's got you in situations that you don't want to be in and will no longer be in for much longer, given his ability to squeeze on the neck and given his ability to use his submission game to his strength. But I don't know about you, bro, and you can't give up or tip your hand on the – I think if we're picking tat for tat, this is one of the easier picks for me on this entire fight card. I think Verdum has to go out there with a woeful game plan in order to lose this fight. Your thoughts?
Yeah, as you alluded to, it's a very good matchup for Verdum. That's why we're seeing him as a big favorite here, despite the long layoff. And there's some red flags on him, certainly. We talked about Dominick Cruz earlier, but Verdum is another guy that hasn't fought since March 2017. In that fight, he lost via finish to Alexander Volkov. No shame in that, but I'm just saying it's kind of a concern seeing that was his last fight. And then in addition to that, he contemplated not wanting to be with the promotion anymore. So despite all the red flags, he's still a big favorite because, as you said, it is a good matchup for him. And what you said about Oleinik, yeah, I mean, I don't know that he's necessarily being figured out. I just think that, like, he's going to struggle the most in fights if he can't get under the ground. And yeah, like the Overeem fight, Overeem's got great takedown defense. In addition to that, I mean, he pulled guard on Overeem. Overeem's got, I mean, he's known for his striking. We talked about just Pettis and Cerrone, but Overeem's also a very good grappler as well. Very tough to submit. I think he's only been submitted one time. So that was just a very tough matchup for him on paper. And then the Harris fight, Harris is another athletic specimen, and then just came out right away and was able to finish the fight. So I don't know that like he's being like figured out. I just think that these guys that he lost to recently are just tougher matchups for him. You know, certainly most fighters, and I say most because you know, coincidentally he's getting matched up with a guy here that should have the advantage grappling. He's able to implement that game if he get to the ground because he's just so good at jiu-jitsu, you know, high pedigree, so many wins via submission. But Verdum is the better submission grappler. You know, Verdum's more credentialed. Verdum's also never been submitted in 32 pro fights. Verdum submitted the likes of Cain Velasquez, Fedor Emelianenko. For as good as Oleinik is, and he probably is the second best heavyweight in the UFC submission-wise, Verdum is better than him. And so that's why we're seeing him as a big favorite. There's also other advantages he has. But, yeah, like you said, first off, truly high-level heavyweight submission grappling here between these two gentlemen. And it's I can't think of another fight like this quite like in recent memory.
Quick bullet point before we continue to trudge along. Is Verdum with a win, let alone an impressive one, let alone a quick one? Is Verdum with a solid, convincing enough win right back in the thick of things as far as the conversation as for a title shot in the near future at heavyweight is concerned?
You know, when you first sent me that question, I wasn't really sure, but then I looked at the rankings and who's ranked above. You know, I think that a win over Oleinik would certainly put him in the top 10. But, you know, with guys in the mix like, you know, we talked about Ngannou and Rosenstruck also on this card. You also got Curtis Blades. You've also got very good prospect in Cyril Gane, who just cracked the top 15.
You mean future champion Cyril Gane, right?
He is a beast. I'm glad
that guy is my favorite prospect. That guy is my favorite prospect in the entire sport. Either he or you ever heard of the kid fighting over at KSW, Parnasse, Saladin Parnasse?
I have not.
After this, remind me to send you how to spell his name. Dude, you have got to see that guy. That dude is so impressive. But I'll leave it at that. Remind me after, and I'll send you some of his fights. You will be blown away with that dude. Cyril Gane, though, right up there as we get off topic. Go ahead and continue, though. I apologize.
No, you're good. I actually think I just found him. So, yeah, we'll talk about that after. But, yeah, man, I just think that I don't know that, he gets right back into the mix. I mean, yeah, he's going to be a top 10 guy, but, I mean, this is a matchup he should really win. And, again, heavyweight's got some – I mean, the division's just changed so much since he left. You know, it's been 2 years, and we've got guys, again, like Curtis Blades type, and even a guy like Alistair Overeem. Overeem beat him 2 times out of the 3 times they fought. And, that's just it's kind of a tricky spot. Similar to Oleinik, it's tough for Verdum to get his grappling going if he can't get the fight to the net. And I see some guys that he would struggle to take down that are ranked above him. Could he win a strikers battle? Yes, but again, I lean towards he would need a couple more wins to really get back in the mix. But certainly a win here would put him off on the right foot, and who knows what happens from there. We've seen Verdum look very impressive before. I wouldn't put it past him to look good again.
Quote, who knows what happens from there? A painting of words solely on the house of the hypothetical heavyweight division, because that is literally the mood every single time heavyweights get in there and bang. Now, from the biggest weight class, if you don't include super heavyweight, which obviously MMA does not have, to the lightest weight class, in a fight where, if we have gone down now in order from the fights we've talked about, excluding Hardy and DeCastro, I think the least is at stake here as far as what happens in the immediate future for former champion Carla Esparza and Miss Karate Hottie mom herself, Michelle Waterson. To me, this is a pick your poison type of thing as far as what Carla Esparza is concerned. She has demonstrated an ability to get to her victories, in my opinion, and from my observance, in one of two ways: pressure, lots of dirty work inside, clinching, and when applicable and when it has been successful, i.e. not the Joanna fight, her ability to continuously pressure with takedowns and continuously use her wrestling in order to get the fight where she wants it to go. I have a feeling that against a fighter like Michelle Waterson, who can certainly hold her own and is really, in my opinion, yes, if you want to say the nickname is apropos to what she could be potentially strong at, that being, her karate style and her constant, up and down movement and kind of unorthodox feel whenever you're standing across from her. If that's her specialty, sure, I'll give it to you. What I think in terms of an advantage for Michelle Waterson is I don't think Michelle is lacking necessarily in any area. I think she's good, if not sufficient, at everything she needs to be. And that's why I think, spoiler alert for the predictions, that she gets her hand raised in this fight and should be a pretty solid bet at plus 125. Okay. What do you see here in this fight between a couple of top 8 115 pounders?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. To your most recent point about Waterson, yeah, I do see improvements in her game too. She's still young, but you would think for her being as experienced in her career, her improvements wouldn't be as pronounced, but they are. I do think that the work that she's putting in at Jackson Wink has really benefited her. Prior to the Joanna fight, she was on an impressive 3-fight winning streak there. And, she lost to Joanna, but we know Joanna, what she's capable of, former champion. We just saw her most recent fight. And she had her moments there. She even had a very slick back take where she had 2 hooks in and had a submission attempt on Joanna. So certainly there's a lot to like about the Karate Hottie's game. She's making a lot of improvements. And Esparza, I do notice improvements in her game as well. Explosive double leg takedown. She showed that in her fight against Verna Jandiroba, a woman that not as many people are familiar with. I do think that she's a very good fighter. What were you going to say?
Going into that fight, I thought the world of Jandiroba going into that fight. And that happens a lot, though, when like Invicta champions or Cage Fury champions or any champions of well-respected regional organizations make their debuts in the UFC. Sometimes we get a little bit clouded judgment. And that was the case for me in that one. I didn't really give Carla much of a chance to win that fight. And she really was ahead the whole time. Yeah,
she impressed me there. Verna still held her own. Yeah, it was. I do like the improvements she made. She trains with Alex Perez. She trains with good training partners. So yeah, I like that. She's still working to get up the rankings here of this like sneaky deep weight class. Like I look at the rankings here, 1 through 15, and even women that aren't even ranked. I mean, this division has like a lot of really, really talented fighters, to be honest with you. So yeah, these women even stand out amongst them, which is very impressive. And I think it's very respectable the improvements that they're making on a fight-to-fight basis. So very interesting fight. And it should be a competitive one and one that should be fun and have some implications for the weight class.
Right. And comment below on the screen. Doesn't matter who wins. Both Esparza and Waterson are going to be food for Zhang. And some unidentified party says Suarez beats them all. Interesting. I don't know who that Davidson Baker guy is, but I agree with what he says. Look, the winner of this fight is going to be right back where they were beforehand. It's going to be either main event, co-main event, more than likely co-main event without like a dance partner like a Joanna that Michelle Waterson had to kind of tango with her. I think the winner here potentially gets a crack into the top 5, maybe a Nina Ansarov. I would like to see Esparza and Gadelha maybe run it back. That fight was a pretty solid fight. I think that was in Chicago a couple of summers ago. That was a fun fight. And didn't Gadelha win that fight? Like, you did. Yeah, and I see the face you made too. Like, you're like, yeah, she won that fight. She didn't win that fight. Esparza won that fight. But when you look down on it and look at what the history books say, it says Claudia won that fight. Was that what that face was for?
Well, kind of, yeah. I was at that fight live. I thought it was really competitive. Like, it kind of was one of those objective fights where what did you want to weigh more? Like, you know, Claudia, I thought was getting the better of the wrestling and grappling exchanges, but certainly Carla was holding her own. And then we saw in the first round she was able to hurt Claudia there briefly. It was a very competitive fight, though. I mean, you know, I think this would a win either way. Nobody would have. I personally wouldn't have said it was a robbery if either woman won, but I think Esparza is just impressed because she was a big underdog in the spot, and the fact that she fought as good with Gadelha was impressive, I thought.
No doubt, no doubt. Suarez's striking cannot handle Zhang's pressure and physical strength. Zhang has an underrated ground game. Suarez ain't that impressive. The disconnect there is the Suarez ain't that impressive part. I think Tatiana is incredibly impressive. However, I'm just about as high on Weili as this guy is too. I in my opinion, those are the two alphas at 115 pounds as it stands. But I digress. And now we move along to a fight, another one that you could put in the house of potentially deserving to be on that main card opening slot. In place of a Hardy and DeCastro, should Hardy have never, you know, pissed as many people off as he did or sacked as many quarterbacks as he did. I'm getting off topic. Regardless, a middleweight fight as the Zracare himself makes the dissension back down to 185 pounds after a less than desirable 205-pound attempt or what may have you. Uriah Hall as well, very quietly, and I mean very quietly, you know, the winner of back-to-back fights against solid competition. I know Bevon Lewis hasn't really had a very good go of it since he's been brought up to the UFC, but he was winning damn near every moment of that fight against Uriah. However, in a fight against a guy like Uriah, as Gegard Mousasi would tell you, one moment you could be winning every second, the next moment you could be getting a foot to your chin from God knows where. And that's obviously doesn't take an MMA genius or an MMA analytic expert to understand that that's on the table every time Uriah fights. My question to you, though, when scratching the surface in this matchup, do you think Jacare, who loves to try to showcase his hands, loves to try to go out there and has time and time again taken the approach when he's had fights, big fights too, by saying, you know what, I don't have to go to my grappling. Let me just go ahead and box with Kelvin Gastelum for 15 minutes. Let me go ahead and try to see what I can do in standing against Jack Hermanson for 25 minutes. Does Jacare play that game, a very dangerous game here, or is he going to go volume takedown, try to snap a limb, snap his neck, in your opinion?
I think he'll try. I just don't know how successful he'll be. One of the interesting statistics I came across when researching this fight is Jacare is 1 for 17 in his last takedown attempts, his last 4 fights, respectively. That's
wow.
Yeah. That was like 0 for 5 or 0 for 3 or something. Jack Hermanson, he was 0 for 3. Chris Weidman, he didn't shoot on him. Weidman's just a superior wrestler. He probably wouldn't have been able to take him down. And then also the Kelvin Gastelum one, he was 1 for 9. Yeah, it was very, your reaction now is my reaction when I came across to that. Yeah. So in Hall, he's certainly Jacare is a better grappler. I think we could agree there. He is on paper, he can land takedowns, but again, just the inefficiencies recently make me uncertain as to if he could do that, even if he comes in with that game plan of trying to really getting Hall down, because obviously he's got the advantage there, superior pedigree by a wide margin. I wouldn't count up Jacare in a stand-up affair, though. Hall
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, Hall still is very dangerous. Obviously, he's an athletic specimen. He's a bit inconsistent at times, but as you alluded to, first off, he's on momentum. I'd imagine his confidence is high, even though it's already high as it is. Training at Fortis MMA with the likes of Ryan Spahn, Jeff Neal, I think that only helps him. I get the circumstances right now aren't allowing people to train their normal regimens, but still a plus on his side. It should be a fun fight. Like you said, it's kind of a sleeper, compared to where it is on the prelims. But two middleweights with a very, very good reputation featured here. Both have wins over a very talented Gegard Mousasi. So I really like this matchmaking here. I think it's very good work by Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard.
And a solid way to potentially lift Jacare, if that possibility is there, back into a position where he can get back into that top 10. Jacare is one of my favorite interviews I've ever had. I had the pleasure of interviewing him the week that he fought Hermanson that week. Really nice dude, really down-to-earth guy. I've always kind of wanted to see him do well, correspondingly. And with that, we take it off television and we take it to the early prelims and a fight that, let's get one damn thing straight, man. If you're going to slap that number 2 next to Pettis and Cowboy and obviously indicate that rematch is taking place, put some respect on the duo of violence that is as well a rematch taking place, the featured early prelim, Vicente Luque and Nico Price. Run it back for the second time. You had some numbers ready, and I got some numbers ready here when it pertains to these two guys. Since these two met in Sao Paulo for UFC Fight Night 119, UFC on FS1, whatever you want to call it, that was Machida and Brunson back in October of 2017. Man, it feels like it's yesterday. But regardless, since that fight has taken place, a fight where Vicente Luque was the winner by Darce in round 2, these two guys have combined for an overall record in totality of 9-3, 12 fights in between both of them since it's taken place. 8 of those 9 victories across both guys have come by way of finish. And 5 of those 8 finishes have come inside of the opening stanza. I don't think I need to display any type of advertisement or have any type of disclaimer that lets anyone that watches the UFC know that these two guys are going to go in there and have a wild time. Their first fight was really fun. But wow, these two have both notched a lot of highlight reel finishes and added a lot of tools to their respective sheds. Since this has happened, if there were a key in your mind to, from Nico Price's perspective, make sure that this fight goes differently, is it as simple as avoiding getting in those grappling exchanges with a guy like a Vicente Luque, or, is it a little bit more complex than that? What would be your approach if you were trying to stave off going down 2-0 in this series if you're Nico Price?
I think the one thing I noticed about the time these first two fought was Nico has a tendency, whether he does it on purpose or not, he tends to create chaos in fights. He fights with a chaotic style, and I think that helps him win fights. He didn't beat Jeff Neal, obviously, but I think he gave himself a better chance. He certainly had some moments in that fight because of the chaos he created there. There was that crazy double knockdown there. But that's what he does. In his first fight with Luque, he didn't really do that, which is kind of surprising considering he's done it pretty much every other fight. So he needs to, I think, avoid the grappling exchanges, because despite the fact that Price is a brown belt, I think he does have some skill on the ground. I think Luque is better than him there.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, but they're both good. And then I think also he'll probably have trouble taking Luque down. I think Luque's not a great wrestler. He doesn't come from a high-level pedigree or nothing like that, but I think Price should have trouble taking him down. But I think what Price needs to do the most is kind of take advantage of, what implement a similar game plan to what Mike Perry was able to do. And I'm not going to, I get Barberena and Thompson had success too, but he doesn't. Price doesn't have that like same kind of volume striking that those guys do. So I see more so like the Mike Perry game plan coming to fruition. Clinch up a bit, make sure you're closing distance off, and making sure that you could close distance and land that big power. Obviously, Price has got freak power. I mean, I don't know. I'll leave it to you to talk about some of those freak show finishes, but like he's got that power that like he could hurt even durable opponents. Alex Morono's generally a durable guy, got a finish there despite losing, the majority of the fight. Even against Tim Means, that fight was a little bit back and forth, but Means had him back against the fence. It looked like Means was about to finish Price, and then what happens? Price counters him with a big shot and wins there. And so you look riled up. I'm just gonna kick it right back to you. But that's what
right up your neck of the woods, man. That's one of the best, biggest, baddest parlays I had ever won betting on a fight card in my life. And the final part was not only Nico Price to win, it was Nico Price by KO or TKO. And if you remember how that fight was going, like I said too, it was a 6-part parlay. First 5 parts all hit flawlessly. That was the only prop. I just had guys straight up beforehand. And then if you remember how that fight was going, those two were getting ready to head back to the stool and leave Davidson sitting on his couch like, oh boy, I think my worst nightmare is about to come true, and I think I'm about to lose this 6-part parlay on the last second. Until nope, Nico Price out of nowhere not only pretty much decapitated Tim Means, but that was a nasty fall that ended up leaving Tim Means with a torn up knee, did it not?
Yeah, he had to go. Yeah, he had to get surgery afterwards, and
poor Tim Means. But there was a celebrating me in my apartment. Think about that, though, being that you are a guy that considers yourself a fancier of the pluses and minuses as far as the crunch of the numbers in MMA or fighting is concerned. Think about this, too. The only more epic parlay winner I've ever had. Can think about Contender Series last summer. Do you remember Sean Woodson?
I do. Yeah, he was a big underdog to a fellow wrestler, right?
Yes. And it was the last part of the parlay. I had the first 4 fights, and I left the Karamagomedov fight, which was the last fight of the night, alone. And I had just those 4. And I had picked Woodson. And for 10 minutes straight, I'm just like, oh, I'm going to lose. I'm going to flying knee. Just jump up and celebrating. And either of these guys have the ability to do that. Nico Price having proved it. And as I've alluded to, the second most incredible parlay winner of my life. Just a quick history lesson as far as my wallet and fighting is concerned. We got a question here. If Edmund Shabazian beats Derek Brunson, which he will, does the UFC fast track him to the title shot against Israel Adesanya? How would Las Vegas bookmaker make the odds? Is that competitive or a wash? Let's just say, okay, hypothetically speaking, I don't think there's any shot. No matter how much I like Edmund Shabazian, no, actually cancel that. How much I love Edmund Shabazian, as far as his makeup is concerned, his toolbox, he was a guy going into the Contender Series with every summer. I do balls to the wall study on all these guys coming into the Contender Series. He's one of those guys, kind of like a Miles Johns, kind of like, what I thought Alton Meeks was when we were talking about him and DeCastro earlier. He's one of those guys that when doing the study up before the Contender Series and watching him on the regional scene, you don't have to look at any Tapology records on the opposite side to know that Edmund Shabazian was a problem the moment he got into this thing. Do not believe, though, that just a win, no matter how fast or how spectacular it is over Brunson, do not believe that that puts him right into title shot area, per se. I think Israel was really fast-tracked because of Israel's uncanny ability to kind of make a crowd go ooh and ah with what he says, and his charisma and his ability to really work a microphone. Edmund Shabazian doesn't really have that, or if he does, we haven't seen it yet. I think Edmund Shabazian is a couple of wins away from getting to that top tier. However, I mean, if there are guys at 185 pounds right now that have future champion in their pedigree, he's damn near at the top of the list.
Yeah.
What say you?
Yeah, like yourself, I'm high on him as well. I'd imagine a lot of people are. And I agree with you too. I think he does need at least one more win after Brunson. I'm looking at the rankings now. He's ranked 9th. Brunson is ranked 8th. And you've got gentlemen such as Kelvin Gastelum, Hermanson, Till, Romero ranked above him, Cannonier as well. So I think one more just based off the rankings. The division is kind of sneaky tight, like there's a lot of guys, like wins. I mean, we talked about those other weight classes, but there's a lot of guys like on win streaks here that have just fought for a title. So yeah, certainly he could fight. I wouldn't put it past him. I'm very high on him as well. I think he can contend for the title. And the other thing too is he's so young, like he could even get way better than he's shown, like, which is crazy because he's already shown to be really talented. Like you said, the finishing capabilities, he checks so many boxes. So certainly that's something that they would show in the pipeline. And as it pertains to the odds, I would have to imagine they make Israel a solid favorite, just considering how he's looked. And, I know that fight against Romero was underwhelming to some, but, he showed, he could take a good shot from a heavy-handed striker. And, he still showed that he could find ways to win despite, not being the most ideal circumstances in terms of the fight. So I would imagine you'd get Edmund as a pretty decent, not a ridiculously sized underdog, but an underdog nonetheless.
Israel haters would be sitting there screaming, "Yeah, well, you saw we did Brett Tavares. Brett Tavares couldn't last 3 minutes to have a Shabazian." It's all about matchups. It's all about perspective. And the difference between Adesanya and Shabazian in that respect is there's only one man in that equation that also puts himself in the company of one other man to have ever debuted for the Ultimate Fighting Championship in their 3rd UFC fight. Those two men being Israel Adesanya and Conor McGregor. Two people that I think a couple of, fight fans have heard of once or twice. We move along. We've been here for a while, damn near almost 2 hours. I could thank AJ for sitting here with me all this time and me taking way too long to kind of drag this along, but we have the end for that. And we have 2 more fights to briefly talk about before we get to that. And one of them being on any regular fight night card, this fight would probably be one of those that you look like, say, for example, like a UFC Rio Rancho, or like some of those fight night cards at locations that make you go, oh, they're going there. Okay. If this scenario was happening this weekend, I think this fight is on the main card. I think this fight is getting a lot of attention from more of the MMA hardcores throughout the week. And I think it's an honor for these two guys having as few UFC fights as they have combined compared to the rest of these fights, that they're just on this card alone. And I think it speaks to how sneaky good this matchup is, especially to those who are not aware of either guy's skill set, which I think they'll be in for a treat. What say you? What do you think about this fight at 145 pounds?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a good sneaky matchup. Yeah, these gentlemen, if it was on any other card, they'd probably be higher up in the card. They're both very good grapplers. They're both excellent grapplers. I believe Mitchell was recently promoted to a black belt because doing my research at the beginning of all this, we had some scraps there, but he was a brown belt. So kudos to him for doing that. Rosso's also a black belt. So certainly these guys are skilled on the mats. And Mitchell's got, he's got a good fan base. He's a likable guy from Arkansas. Got that very impressive twister win last time. And the second time that's only happened in UFC history. And just an exciting guy to watch. Markets himself, see what he posts on Twitter. And Rosa's also an exciting guy. Rosa, after that big layoff there, came back and submitted a submission whiz in Andy Bermuda. So very impressive. He was able to come back after, I believe it was neck surgery for about like 30 months or so, and submit a guy like Bermudez off of his back. And, even before the layoff, that Shane Burgos fight was pretty competitive. It's not Burgos is so talented, it's not, there's no shame in losing to him. So yeah, I think I'm with you. This is a matchup where I don't think people are like overlooking, but I think that like it being on the early prelims doesn't do it as good a justice as even these other two fights, as good a justice to how good it actually is.
easy to overlook it too, even though like you said, while one may not be overlooking, you could begin from the bottom up and like be like, oh, that's a good fight. Oh my god, oh my god, that fight. Cowboy and Pettis aren't even on the main card. Well, like, you know what I'm saying? Like you work your way up to the main event and you can forget about it in a matter of seconds. But those that find themselves in kind of that hardcore bubble are putting this one right near the top as far as stylistic matchups are concerned. I'm glad you brought up the Manny Bermudez fight. That, again, another scenario from the aforementioned one I was talking about earlier, Yandaroba and Esparza. Have no problem sitting here and saying I was so in Whiff Town on that one. I was way off. I was super high on Bermudez, whether he's a fish or not when it comes to making weight. There was just no way I thought one of these guys, from what Bermudez had been able to do and what he'd been able to put on tape from the regional scene onward, there's no way that someone was going to get that guy to tap, man. But we forgot about Charles Rosa's ability. I think Charles Rosa's ability to chain submissions together is what makes him so dangerous too. And that's where he has found success in the past. Is he from Arkansas pulling off twisters and halfway cutting his nutsack off? No. And that's why Bryce Mitchell may or may not have gotten the spot on this card, because he's a guy that's kind of somewhat become very quietly a fan favorite here. But Charles Rosa is going to give Bryce Mitchell everything he's handling and then some in this fight. Bryce Mitchell, I believe, if he wins, would be 4-0 or 3-0 in the UFC. I'm fact checking at the moment. Bryce Mitchell is 12-0 as a pro. Don't act like I forgot that he lost to Brad Katona on Tough, though, even though it doesn't count. Yeah, 3-0. So he would be a shiny 4-0 in the UFC featherweight division. The UFC featherweight division, as of right now, as my computer continues to take absolutely forever, the fighters that can say right now that they are 4-0, a very shiny 4-0, at 145 pounds are Sadiq Youssef and Ryan Hall.
Good company.
That'd be, yeah, you'd be putting yourself in pretty solid company. I think he's probably another win away from getting into that top 15. Could Bryce Mitchell hang with the likes of Zombie, Ortega, Holloway, or Volkanovski? I would say slam on those breaks. As far as potentially, though, down the line, yes. I actually, though, I don't know what it is. Like, I think he has a lot of potential, and I think he could soar in this division. Am I crazy, though? I don't think, if you compare it to the two other guys that are 4-0 that I just mentioned, I think Youssef has more potential. And I think, obviously, Ryan Hall, I mean, everybody's manager is allergic to that guy. I mean, nobody wants to fight that guy. I would say that I am more high on the prospects of Youssef and Ryan Hall as far as the future is concerned. Would you agree, or would you maybe put one guy elsewhere?
I agree with you. I think Bryce could do better. I'm with you on that. He's still very young. I kind of wonder, like, the camp situation, if he's going to move to, like, say, a bigger camp in the future. I think that certainly his grappling is very impressive, but I kind of wonder, well, this matchup in particular, I wonder how, clearly he fared well against Bobby Moffett and Tyler Diamond, but I kind of wonder how he fares against Rosa, because Rosa's shown to tangle on the grounds with the likes of Yair Rodriguez. I think we'll learn a lot about Bryce here, but I think he's going to start to struggle in fights where he can't take fighters to the ground. That's something I noticed with him on tape is he's a solid wrestler. Obviously, he's capable. He took down Matt Sales down right away last time out, but I kind of question, like, if he can't get the fight to the ground, how will it look? I mean, I think his striking is improving, but he doesn't have any wins via TKO KO. So I kind of wonder how that dynamic would play out, but there's still reason to be high on the kid. Like yourself, I think he needs a couple, one or two more wins or maybe more, because this division is, again, another good division to really crack that top 15. But I'm with you. I really like I like all three guys, but yeah, Youssef and Hall are studs too, in their own respective skill sets, well-rounded guys that I wouldn't imagine people be so willing to sign up for, considering their respective pedigrees.
145, we said it earlier too. That's what's so great about MMA as well. Like, we're like, 170, 155 are at the top of the best, but look out for 135 too. And then you start thinking about 145 and you're just like, dude, that division is super stacked as well. So much fun, so much good times, so much violence. It's what we're all here for. Last but not least, easily the fight with the least amount to talk about. I think it's very easy and short and sweet, to the point as far as what this fight entails. This is a showcase fight, in my opinion. The odds makers do agree with me. We do have kind of an odds swear in and of himself here to say whether or not he agrees with the notion that Ryan Spann should be the biggest favorite on this card. Sam Alvey, though, is one zig where he should zag away from all of a sudden having lost 4 in a row in the UFC. And I think this card, we've mentioned it multiple times with multiple different guys, particularly guys that have names and particularly guys that have reputations. They lose, they're probably not going to get cut just because of who they are. Sam Alvey, if you're a hardcore fan, you know Sam Alvey. Smiling Sam Alvey, synonymous. He in the UFC like a bat out of hell. I think he won his first 3 fights all by stoppage, and has just kind of put together a very respectable tenure inside the octagon across, I think, 3 different weight classes. He loses this fight, though, it's 4 in a row. He loses this fight, that would make it, and if he's finished by Ryan Spann, that'd make it 3 times being finished in a span of 4. Mark Goddard ain't going to be in there for him to have that potential excuse here. I do think Sam Alvey could also win this fight potentially. However, with Fortis MMA not having a seat at the table really yet, Uriah Hall doesn't really count. It's apropos that a top prospect of what I consider the hottest gym in MMA potentially getting to be the first guy to fight on this card, and in my opinion will be the first guy to be sent off with a win in Ryan Spann. Do you feel like the upset could potentially be in the cards here? And if not, do you potentially see the UFC cutting Sam Alvey with a loss?
Yeah, stylistically, Alvey, I mean, he's not the type of fighter that I would think would give Spann the most trouble. That's why we're seeing him as such a big favorite. It's a very favorable matchup for Spann. And yeah, to your point, I do think that with a loss here, unfortunately, unlike what you said about what we talked about with Donald and Anthony and Stevens, a loss here for Alvey, unfortunately, I think most likely will mean release from the promotion. That might be the best thing for him. One of his big advantages I noticed a lot was his durability. He's got a very good chin, but then we've seen him get finished via strikes his last 2 out of his past 3 outings. I know Nogueira and Cruz, hit hard and they're strong guys, but it just doesn't look good. After you couple that with the fact of him losing the last fight, and yeah, Fortis MMA, like you, I think they're a very good camp. They're a hot camp. Spann really should win. He's a big guy, even for this weight class's standards. Spann has been, hurt in fights before, and I know Alvey hits hard. But the thing that in theory could mean that Alvey wins by TKO KO. But the thing with Alvey is, though, he has this tendency, and I'm sure you've noticed on tape, that he just backs himself into the fence a lot. It's kind of comfortable.
All the time. All the time.
So it's obvious, but for those out there that don't know, that's what he does, and he's a counter striker. And the thing, some counter strikers are busier than others, but he kind of is in a lot of competitive, split decision type fights if he doesn't win by knockout, because his output is so low, and he's very reliant on doing damage. Even the John Vellante fight, he hurt Vellante briefly, almost finished him. Might have been if there was more time in the round, but again,
that's the fight I thought of right off the bat when you talked about his kind of split decision, kind of getting by a hair style. That's the first fight I thought of.
Yeah, because to your point, the reason why that was split, because Vellante was the aggressor. That generally creates a better visual in the judge's eyes. You got, if the volume's relatively competitive, nobody's really hurting each other all that much, and you got one guy that's got his back towards the fence, not throwing as much. Well, that creates a better visual in the aggressor's eyes, in the eyes of the judges. So that's really Alvy's path to victory. Is like, sure, he could hit Spann with a big punch. It's not impossible, but like you said, Spann's the rightful favorite here. I think he's on momentum at 3-fight winning streak compared to 3-fight losing streak. Talented guy. Really like his grappling too. I don't know that that's like a major talking point about him in general, but like the Nogueira fight showed very good guard passing. He has a very good guillotine choke that's well documented. So yeah, certainly, and he's still a young guy too. So certainly, I think that there's upside with Spann, and yeah, I expect him to win here, like yourself.
And think about a name that has kind of seen a lot of recent success lately as far as 205 pounds is concerned. Emiliano Sordi. That was where Ryan Spann, if you don't count the fight where Ryan Spann barely had an opportunity to even fight, his very first Contender Series fight where Carl Roberson was in and out. His actual getting of his, mixing up the words, his actual breaking into the Contender Series as far as winning and getting the contract was against Emiliano Sordi, and that patented guillotine choke that you mentioned came in, I think, less than half a minute. And Emiliano Sordi, I believe, didn't he just win the PFL? Didn't he just win the PFL $1 million tournament?
I actually don't follow PFL.
I don't blame you. I think in a couple of years, I think no one will be able to follow the PFL. Because it's like, how do you pay everybody so much money for winning a tournament when there's no way that they make what's necessary to kind of break even in that regard? But getting off topic, regardless, yes, I was correct. Looking it up, Sordi won 5 fights in a row. Vinny Magalhaes, Bazagit Atayev, Sigi Pasalele, Atayev a second time, and then former UFC middleweight Jordan Johnson, and Ryan Spann snatched his neck in under 30 seconds.
Wow.
So we have finally come to the conclusion of the fight breakdowns per se. We've been at it for over 2 hours, so now if I'm not slurring my words, I'm either mixing consonants up or speaking dyslexia into existence. I don't know at this point. My mouth is begging me to kind of shut it down, and I will do that by doing so, saying goodbye on this podcast, but definitely not without thanking my man AJ for coming on here. I had no doubts that he was going to come on and give me an incredible insight, and I had no doubts that was going to be delivered in a back and forth style. And I also have no doubts that there's going to be really incredible content anywhere you go and find him, which AJ is where. Go ahead and plug in everything you need to plug. Where you at? Where can people find you? Where do you share your content?
Before that, I would just like to say it's a pleasure to be on here with you. It was a great time talking the fights with you, all things MMA as pertains to this card. And yeah, I can be found on Twitter at AJ MMA Betting. I could also be found on Instagram at the same handle as well. I produce content, just like Dave mentioned at the very beginning, for MMA Oddsbreaker, as well as my own website, and professional MMA bettor, handicapper, and one that always looks to provide value. So I produce free content as well as subscription services, and I'm relatively active on social media. So if you want some solid content, please give me a follow, and I'll deliver for you.
You doing anything content-wise for this weekend? Like anything on Saturday or anything to that effect?
I'm not going to go like live or anything like that, but I did do a free breakdown of the co-main events that I've been marketing a lot. So again, I'll just, I guess, plug it here. If anybody wants to see that, please let me know, and I'll deliver you a free copy. Dave, I can deliver it to you as well of the co-main event. I broke it down. It's about a 13-minute long podcast.
I'd love to take a look at it.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, as it pertains to coming up to the fight, got the cards broken down. Obviously, my DMs are open, so if you'd like to learn more, please let me know, and I'll be happy to help. But yeah, nothing planned on Saturday. Just going to watch the fights. So. And
you can see right where I'm pointing. That's his at AJ MMA Betting. You can see my at. I'm backwards. Yeah. There it is. There it is. You can take a look at my good content at Dave Bake MMA. I will be live recapping and on duty, on assignment, whatever you fancy, this weekend for the fights for fan-sided as well as both. Can't believe it. I got both the 13th and the 16th off from work in order to do that all over again for the Jacksonville fight nights, 1 and 2, parts 1 and 2, whatever may have you. And we will be back on this program for previews of both of those events as well. Outside of the MMA spectrum, I've got, after the NFL schedule comes out tonight, within the coming days, there will be a guest joining me. Do not have it nailed down as of yet, but I will know within the next 24 hours. Once the NFL schedule comes out tonight, within the next 3 days, someone that I have contacted, just don't know who yet, is going to come on, and we're going to play some over-under. We're going to play some playoff predictions and talk a bunch of football. However, only one sport is within 48 hours away from actually coming into our living rooms. And I absolutely can't wait. AJ, thank you very much, my man. I appreciate you. For those that listened and those that watched, we appreciate you as well. Those that were in the comment section asking questions, listening on Anchor, whichever avenue you choose to travel, I thank you very much and hope to see you again soon. Good night, everybody.
Take care, guys.